Alright, so I've been working with Azure Cloud for almost 8 years now, and if I had to start over today, my approach would be completely different. The way we used to learn cloud back in 2018, 2017, all the certification grind that people were pushing for, it's basically dead right now. And if you're still following the old playbook, you are setting up yourself to waste a lot of your time. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how I would learn Azure in 2026, the specific path I would take, the things I would focus on, and most importantly, what stuff I would entirely skip over. Make sure to watch till the end because I'm going to share one mistake that people make that keep them stuck in the learning loop for years without getting hired. First thing first, what has actually changed now? Well, let me tell you a bit about my story. I started working with Microsoft technology almost a decade ago, and for the last 7 years, I've been working deep into Azure. I spent 4 years in a training company where I was building hands-on lab and creating curriculum for IT professionals. I worked directly with organizations from mid-size to enterprise range, helping them move to cloud, build AVD infrastructure, and also do Kubernetes and container migrations. I became Microsoft certified trainer, and somewhere along the way, I realized the gap between what people are teaching in the classrooms and what's happening in the real world is massive. So I started my own consulting agency and this YouTube channel where I share my learnings and the stuff that's actually happening in the field. The real problem, real solution, and the stuff that you don't see on the Microsoft documentation pages. And here's what I have learned. If I were to start my Azure journey today, I would not spend months studying for certifications, and I would not watch hours of video courses taking notes. One last thing is I would not try to memorize any service definition, hoping it converts to real skill, which it does not. Now, don't get me wrong, I have a lot of certifications in Microsoft Azure and M365, and they were helpful to me throughout my career. But the world has changed now. Employers have changed, and what gets you hired has completely changed. And if you are still thinking that certification is your ticket to a cloud role, you are honestly 3 years behind. So here's what I would do if I was starting to learn Azure from scratch in 2026. I would follow a very specific path. First, get enough foundation knowledge to not be lost in the cloud. Second, start building actual production scenario immediately. Third, use AI to accelerate and fill the gap in your learning. Fourth, document everything I build in public. Number 5 is keep repeating this cycle and finally going into a deeper specialization area. And that's the framework. Learn quickly, build immediately, practice continuously, document publicly, and specialize strategically. Now with the tools like Claude and ChatGPT, you can move through these cycles way quickly than ever before. And I'm talking about weeks instead of months. So let's break down each step. So step 1 is learning about absolute fundamental. Just enough to get you started and not 6 months deep dive into each service of Azure. Start with the basic, like what's cloud computing, what are core Azure services, how does identity work with Entra ID, what's the difference between virtual machine and app service. Now here's where most people go wrong. They spend 3 months on Microsoft Docs looping through every single documentation page learning about the service. And what they miss is actually going into Azure portal and trying to work with the service itself. You should be using Microsoft Learn as a reference, not a textbook. When you hit a snag in Azure, open ChatGPT and ask it to explain you like a 5 years old. And I'm serious about this. If you're confused about Azure network security or security groups or ASGs, just paste that into ChatGPT and say, explain this to me in simple analogy. These AI tools now we have are insane for learning because they can adapt to your knowledge level. They can give you examples, ask you quiz, and they can break down every single complex topic into simpler form that's easy for you to digest. And here's something nobody's talking about. Learning to use AI effectively is more valuable than trying to memorize every single Azure service. Because when you're working as a cloud engineer, you're definitely going to have access and going to use AI tools anyways. I use it every day to write my PowerShell scripts, to brainstorm architecture, and to troubleshoot any issue that comes up. So learn Azure and AI at the same time. Now let's talk about certifications because I know somebody's gonna ask this question. My honest take, Azure certification in 2026 are simply just a roadmap for your learning. They are not the job tickets anymore. 5 years ago, you could put AZ104 and AZ305 and easily get a job in cloud computing. Today, with even those certs, it's really hard to break into the industry. But I still think studying for certifications is useful, but because it gives you a structured path of learning. For example, if you're new to cloud, AZ900 gives you a decent overview of every single service in Azure, and AZ104 Azure Administrator covers most of the stuff you need to know while working in a cloud role. So if you have the money, take the exam if you want the badge. But if you're on a budget, just study the material for free on Microsoft Learn and skip over the exam and go straight for AZ104. Because what matters the most is step number 2, which is building projects. This is where most learners fail. They watch tutorials, they take notes, they feel like they're learning, but they're not actually building anything real in cloud. And then they wonder why don't they get hired. Here's the truth. The employer does not care how many certification exams and how many courses you have taken. They care about what you can actually do. Can you deploy a hub and spoke network in the cloud? Do you know the difference between Azure Virtual Machine, Container App, Kubernetes services? Can you automate a VM management with PowerShell? And can you secure an Entra ID tenant? These are real skills companies need right now. And the only way to build them is by doing them yourself, not watching somebody else do it. So if I was starting today, I would start building production ready scenario immediately. And most importantly, I would focus on three important areas: infrastructure, security, and automation. For infrastructure, I would learn how to deploy a virtual network, NSG, firewall, every single service in Azure that corresponds to networking, because every single Azure environment needs proper networking. For security, I would focus on Entra ID, which is Microsoft's identity platform. I would look at PIM, conditional access policy, securing identities, because identity is the new parameter now. Everything revolves around it. For automation, I would learn PowerShell, not Python, not Terraform, just the PowerShell, because that's what you need to manage Azure at scale. Now, if you're thinking, I don't know what projects to build, here's what I would recommend. Start with deploying a simple multi-tier web app. Deploy it with proper networking and security configuration, and then try to automate the whole deployment using PowerShell. Next, build Azure Virtual Desktop environment. This is huge right now with remote work, and you definitely want this on your resume. And then create some kind of monitoring and alerting dashboard using Azure Monitor and Log Analytics. These are real scenario companies are deploying every single day in their environment. If you can show that you have built this, you are immediately ahead of 90% of the people out there. Okay, number three is something that separates people who get good from people who stay stuck in the learning loop. That's using practice to identify and fill your gap in the knowledge. Here's what's going to happen. You are going to start building a project and you are going to realize there's a ton of stuff you need to learn and know before you start deploying. Maybe you don't understand how DNS work. Maybe you're confused about Azure RBAC rules. And maybe you've never used Azure PowerShell before. And that's completely normal. Write down everything you don't understand and make time to learn it. Don't just gloss over it and hope it makes sense later on. For example, when I started learning Azure initially, I knew very little about Azure networking. I knew the basics, but when I had to deploy that first hub and spoke network architecture, I realized there's a lot of things to learn right now. So I spent the next 2 weeks learning about Azure networking, subnet, VNets, pairing, VPN gateway, firewalls, private endpoint, and everything else that's involved. And that deep dive completely changed how I approach projects now, because I actually understand how the networking is working under the hood. Don't be afraid to pause on a project and go learn something properly. It's just part of the process. Step number 4 is the most underrating, and that's document everything you build in public. Write LinkedIn post about what you're learning, create a GitHub repo with your PowerShell script, and write a blog post explaining how you solved a simple problem. This does two things. First, they prove that you understand what you're talking about. Anyone can say that they know Azure, but if you have a GitHub repo with scripts and templates inside and a technical article, that's a proof right there. And second, it builds your personal brand. I know that sounds weird. Some people are not interested in building the personal brands, but when I started posting on LinkedIn and writing blog posts, I've got a lot of consulting opportunity alone from writing those articles. The thing in the end is, the more visible you are, more opportunity comes to you. Now here's the thing. You don't have to be an expert to write any technical article. And in fact, some of the best articles came from beginner levels. People who are still in the trenches explain it very well that other people who don't understand cloud or Azure are able to grasp the information and learn from it quickly. So document your journey, share the projects that you're building, and talk about what you're building and how. You will be genuinely surprised how many doors it opened for you. Alright, step number 5 is where you start to specialize. Because here's the reality, you cannot be expert in everything in cloud. Azure is massive and it's growing every single day. So you need to pick one area and go deep into it. This is what industry calls being T-shaped. You have broad knowledge across Azure, but deep expertise in one specific domain. For example, you may specialize in Azure security and become the person who knows everything in and out about Entra ID. Or you may specialize in infrastructure automation and you become the Bicep or Terraform guy. Or maybe you go deep into Azure AI and learn Microsoft Foundry and Copilot Studio. The specific area doesn't matter as much as the fact that you have one. Because when companies are hiring, they want somebody who knows a little bit about everything, but they're also looking for somebody who can solve specific problem that they are currently having. So once you've built some projects, pick a specialty and double down on it. Now, before we wrap up, I need to talk about the biggest mistake I see people make while learning cloud. And that is learning Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud at the same time. Someone decides that they want to get into cloud and they start studying for AZ900, AWS Cloud Practitioner, and GCP Cloud Leader. And they end up being confused and overwhelmed because they are mixing up all the services from different vendors. Learn one cloud properly first. Once you understand Azure or AWS, understanding other cloud is way simpler because the fundamental stays the same. Virtual machine is a virtual machine. whether it's called VM or EC2. The specific name and the interfaces change, but the concept does not. So master Azure and then expand if you need to. Alright, there you have it. So that's exactly how I would learn Azure in 2026 if I'm starting over again. Get the foundation knowledge quickly, start building real projects immediately, use AI to accelerate your learning, document everything you build publicly. Finally, specialize in one single area and just keep repeating the cycle because cloud is ever changing. There's always something new to learn. The people who succeed are the ones who stayed curious and kept building. If you found this helpful, let me know in the comments what you're working on right now in your Azure journey. I would love to hear from you and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay curious and keep building.